What you're about to hear today is one of the most shocking and heartbreaking courtroom cases ever to unfold in front of a judge. It started as a routine theft hearing, but before the day was over, the judge's entire world would collapse right there in his own courtroom. Before we begin, if you believe that every person deserves both justice and forgiveness, make sure to subscribe to Sweet Justice and tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because this story will remind you that no matter how powerful we become, we can never escape the truth of our hearts. The courtroom was unusually quiet that morning. The smell of old wood and polished brass filled the air. Papers shuffled softly as Judge Robert Hayes, a man in his late 50s with a firm jawline and eyes that carried both wisdom and weariness, adjusted his glasses and scanned the docket for the day. Case number 1123, his clerk announced. State versus Lily Carter, charged with theft and identity fraud. Robert nodded mechanically. He'd seen it all before. Desperate people making desperate choices. He tapped his pen lightly on the bench. Bring in the defendant. The heavy doors creaked open. Two officers escorted in a young woman, handcuffed, wearing a plain beige jumpsuit. Her hair was tangled, her face pale, and her eyes looked like they hadn't seen peace in years. Robert barely looked up at first. Ms. Carter, he began in his usual steady tone. You are charged with... He stopped mid-sentence. His voice faltered. Something about her, the slope of her nose, the way she looked down when nervous, hit him like a punch to the chest. For a moment he couldn't breathe. Your Honor? The clerk whispered, noticing his hesitation. Robert blinked, straightened his papers, and cleared his throat. Continue, the prosecutor stood. Your Honor, the defendant is accused of stealing identification documents and using them to obtain credit in someone else's name. This isn't her first offense. The state recommends remand, the defense attorney quickly interjected. Your Honor, my client's actions were driven by survival, not malice. She's been homeless for years and... But Robert wasn't listening anymore. His heartbeat was loud in his ears. He looked at the name on the file again, Lily Carter. Born April 3rd, 2001. He whispered the date under his breath. April 3rd. That was the same day his daughter was born. He leaned back slowly, his hand trembling slightly under the desk. It can't be. It's not possible, Your Honor, the defense attorney asked gently. Robert quickly composed himself. Proceed, he said, his voice firmer now, hiding the storm brewing inside. Lily finally lifted her eyes. Just for a second. And when she did and the world stopped moving, he saw them. The same hazel eyes that used to run toward him every morning when she was 5. The same eyes that looked at him through a car window the last time he saw her, when his ex-wife drove away, taking Lily with her after the divorce. 15 years. 15 years of silence. And now she was standing there, not as his daughter, but as a defendant. The rest of the courtroom blurred. The lawyers kept talking, the jury scribbled notes, but Robert heard nothing. He could only hear his own voice from years ago. I'll find you, Lily. No matter what happens, I'll find you. He had failed. Now fate had brought her back, but in the cruelest way imaginable. He tightened his grip on the gavel, trying to steady himself. Judges weren't supposed to feel. But in that moment, his heart was breaking beneath his robe. The courtroom was silent except for the faint hum of the old ceiling fan spinning lazily above. Judge Robert Hayes adjusted his robe. Black, crisp, a symbol of authority he had carried for 25 years. But right now, that robe felt unbearably heavy. The defendant stood motionless in front of him. Her hands cuffed in front of her, trembled slightly as she looked around the courtroom. The flags, the spectators, the gavel that gleamed under the soft morning light. It was all too much for Robert to process. He had seen hardened criminals cry, mothers plead, and even innocent men crumble under the weight of accusation. But this was different. The woman standing before him was his daughter. Your Honor, the prosecutor began again. The defendant was apprehended at a downtown pharmacy attempting to use a stolen identity card. Security footage confirms her actions. We also have evidence of multiple prior offenses, all involving small-scale identity fraud. Robert barely heard him. His mind was somewhere else entirely. 15 years in the past, to be exact. He remembered the day his wife, Karen, had packed up the house. Their marriage had been disintegrating for years. Long nights of arguments about his long hours, his obsession with justice, his coldness at home. He thought he was building a future for them by working so hard. She thought he was just running from family life. Their daughter Lily was only 9 when it all fell apart. She had cried that morning, clutching her little pink backpack. "Daddy, can I take Mr. Whiskers?" she'd asked, holding her stuffed cat. He'd knelt beside her, promising through tears, "Of course you can, sweetheart. And I'll come visit every weekend, okay?" But the visits stopped after a year. Then came the restraining order. Not because he had done anything wrong, but because Karen had remarried, and her new husband didn't want Robert around. He sent letters, gifts, none were ever answered, and now, 15 years later, his little girl was back, in chains. The defense attorney, a soft-spoken woman named Sandra Pierce, stepped forward. "Your Honor," she said, "my client has been living on the streets for over 3 years. She struggled with addiction and has no family support. She's admitted to making poor choices, but what she needs is rehabilitation, not incarceration." Robert glanced at Lily again. She was thin, almost frail. Her wrists looked too delicate for those cold metal cuffs. He could see faint bruises on her arms. Old ones, faded, but there. Her hair was greasy, her nails chipped, her voice silent. She didn't look like the vibrant little girl who once painted his office walls with pink fingerprints. She looked lost. He took a deep breath. "You cannot reveal it," he reminded himself. "You're a judge. This is your courtroom. You cannot let emotion decide justice." And yet, how could he separate the two? How could he be both a father and a judge in this moment? The bailiff leaned toward him. "Your Honor, are you all right?" Robert blinked quickly. "Yes, proceed," Sandra continued. "Ms. Carter was raised in foster care after her mother passed away. She was never adopted, and she aged out of the system at 18. Since then, she's had no stable employment, no permanent address, and no support system. What she did was wrong, but she did it to survive. She deserves a second chance. Karen passed away." The words slammed into Robert like a freight train. He almost dropped his pen. He wanted to stop the trial right there. He wanted to shout, "Who told you that? What happened? When did she die?" But the law held him frozen. His throat tightened, but his voice came out steady. "Do you have any documentation of her background?" Sandra nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. Her file includes her foster care history and the mother's death certificate." Robert reached out and took the file with a trembling hand. He flipped to the back. There it was. Karen Hayes, deceased. Overdose, 2015. He had been in the middle of a high-profile murder trial when it happened. No one told him. No one thought to reach out. He swallowed hard. "All these years, and I never even knew." "Ms. Carter," he finally said, trying to regain his composure, "do you wish to make a statement before we proceed with pretrial considerations?" Lily hesitated. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "No, Your Honor." But her eyes, they said everything. They were terrified, hollow, and confused. But when they met his again, something flickered there. Recognition. It was as if some part of her had sensed it too. She looked at him longer this time, her lips parting slightly as if she was about to say something. But didn't. She looked down again, defeated. Robert's fingers clenched beneath the bench. Court recessed for 10 minutes. Robert walked into his chambers like a man walking through fog. His clerk, a young assistant named Evan, followed nervously. "Sir, are you sure you're okay?" "You've been..." "Distant," Robert nodded absently. "Just tired." He closed the door behind him and finally allowed himself to collapse into his chair. He stared at the old family photo on his shelf, the one he never had the heart to take down. Karen smiling, Lily sitting on his shoulders. They were happy once. Before the arguments, before the distance. He traced Lily's tiny face with his finger in the photo. Now she was a defendant in his courtroom. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, and whispered to himself, "How did I let this happen?" When he returned to the courtroom, his voice carried the same authority as always. But his eyes betrayed the man behind the robe. After reviewing the preliminary evidence, he said, "This court will schedule a hearing for sentencing next week. In the meantime, the defendant will be remanded into county custody." Sandra protested gently. "Your Honor, given her fragile condition, could we request temporary release to a shelter?" Robert hesitated. He wanted to say yes. Every bone in his body wanted to say yes, but he couldn't show favoritism. "The request is denied," he said quietly. "Bailiff, please escort the defendant." Lily looked at him one last time as the officers took her away, and in that glance, just before she disappeared through the courtroom door, Robert saw tears in her eyes. Not fear. Not guilt. Recognition. That night, Robert didn't go home. He drove for hours aimlessly through the rain-soaked streets of the city. He parked outside the old neighborhood where he and Karen had lived. The little blue house was gone, replaced by a new apartment building. Everything had changed. He sat there, gripping the steering wheel, replaying the day over and over in his mind. She called herself Lily Carter. Not Hayes, why Carter? Did Karen remarry? Did she change her name? He felt the years of fatherhood he had missed burning in his chest. Her birthdays, her graduations, her first heartbreak. And now all that remained was a broken young woman behind bars, one he was legally bound to judge. The next morning, Robert arrived early at court, bleary-eyed but determined. He pulled Lily's file again. Every page hurt. The foster records, the police reports, the hospital visits. They painted a picture of abandonment, pain, and survival. He whispered to himself, "She doesn't deserve this. Not after everything." He couldn't recuse himself, not without revealing the truth. And if he did that, the case could be thrown out, and she might end up back on the streets. No, he decided. He'd stay on. He'd protect her the only way he could, through justice. That afternoon, he called a private investigator he trusted. "I need you to find everything you can about a woman named Lily Carter," he said. Foster history, background, everything, quietly. The man on the other end was puzzled. "You don't usually get involved like this, Judge. What's the connection?" Robert hesitated. "Let's just say it's personal." By the end of the week, the report came in. It confirmed everything. Lily was indeed his daughter. Karen had remarried a man named Michael Carter, who was later arrested for domestic abuse. Lily ran away at 16 and was never found. Robert sat in his office with the report in hand, tears welling in his eyes. He whispered, "Oh, Lily, what did life do to you?" He made a decision that would change everything. In the next hearing, he wouldn't just be a judge. He'd be a father trying to save his daughter's soul. The courtroom clock ticked louder than usual that morning. Every second felt like an echo of the past, a countdown towards something Robert Hayes couldn't escape. He sat at the bench, robe perfectly pressed, expression unreadable. But inside, his heart was restless. Today was Lily's sentencing hearing. He had read the case file a dozen times. Every line burned his conscience. Identity theft, third offense, possible sentence of 2 years. To everyone else, she was just another repeat offender. To him, she was his daughter, the same little girl who once colored on his law books with a pink crayon and called him her hero. But none of that mattered here. In this courtroom, he wasn't Dad, he was Your Honor. The bailiff called out, "All rise." Everyone stood as the door opened and the defendant was led in. Lily looked better this time. Not clean, but calmer. Her wrists were still cuffed, but her hair was tied back. She glanced toward the bench and froze for half a second before looking away quickly. It wasn't just fear in her eyes now. It was suspicion, like she knew something. "Be seated," Robert said softly. The courtroom sat. "Your Honor," the prosecutor began. "This is a straightforward case. Ms. Carter's criminal history speaks for itself. Identity theft, fraud, and misuse of identification. The state recommends a minimum of 2 years in county correctional." Robert nodded quietly. "Proceed," Sandra Pierce stood to defend. "Your Honor, the state paints my client as a habitual criminal. But that's not the truth. Ms. Carter's past isn't filled with greed. It's filled with survival." She turned toward the court audience, voice filled with passion. This young woman was left alone in a world that offered her nothing. No home, no love, no second chance. She didn't steal for luxury. She stole for food, for warmth, for one more day to live. Lily lowered her head, tears threatening to spill. Robert swallowed hard, holding onto his pen like it was an anchor. Every word pierced him. Sandra continued, "We ask for leniency, Your Honor. Instead of imprisonment, we request community service, therapy, and rehabilitation. Give her a path back, not a wall to break against, the prosecutor scoffed. Your Honor, this is the third time. Compassion didn't work the first two. Robert's eyes lifted slowly toward him. Mr. Daniels, he said, calm but firm, are you suggesting compassion has an expiration date? The room went silent. Daniels cleared his throat. No, Your Honor, I'm saying the law has limits. Robert nodded. So does pain. Everyone in the courtroom exchanged glances. They'd never seen the judge this emotional, this human. Miss Carter, Robert said softly, turning to his daughter. Would you like to address the court this time? She hesitated, looked up, met his eyes. Something inside her cracked open. Yes, Your Honor, she said quietly. The courtroom stilled. She took a shaky breath and spoke. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I never do, I didn't know where else to go. I've been on my own for a long time. I sleep wherever I can, I eat whatever's left behind. Her voice trembled, but she kept going. Every time I try to fix my life, it falls apart again. People look at me like I'm trash, like I'm beyond saving. Maybe they're right. Robert's eyes burned. No, Lily, you're not beyond saving, she continued. When I was little, I used to think my dad was some kind of hero. My mom said he was a judge, that he helped people, that he was fair and kind. Robert froze. She went on, her voice breaking. But he left. She said he didn't want us anymore, that he cared more about his cases than his family. Every word hit him like a hammer. He wanted to speak, to shout that it wasn't true, but he couldn't. Judges didn't talk during statements. I don't even remember his face anymore, she said softly. Sometimes I wonder if he'd even recognize me. Her eyes lifted to meet his again, and in that instant, she knew something flickered in her gaze. Confusion, realization, disbelief. The resemblance in their eyes was undeniable now. The courtroom didn't see it yet, but she did. Her lips trembled. Wait, she whispered. Robert's composure wavered. He had to say something, anything, before the dam broke. Miss Carter, he said quietly, please. Continue, her eyes widened. The way he said her name, the tone, the care, the pain behind it. It wasn't just a judge's voice. It was her father's. Sandra turned to her, concerned. Lily, are you okay? But Lily wasn't listening. Her eyes stayed locked on Robert. Her voice came out barely audible. You. Robert stiffened. She whispered again, louder this time. You know me, don't you? The courtroom gasped softly. Robert's gavel slammed down. Order! Ms. Carter, you will maintain courtroom decorum. But his voice shook. She didn't stop. You're him, aren't you? My dad? Sandra looked horrified. The prosecutor frowned in disbelief. The bailiff took a cautious step forward. Robert's jaw clenched. His eyes glistened. He took a deep breath. This court will take a brief recess. He stood abruptly, robe flowing behind him as he disappeared through the judge's door. In his chambers, he finally broke. His hands trembled. His breath came uneven. How was he supposed to balance justice when his own heart stood accused? Moments later, a soft knock came at the door. It was Sandra Pierce, the defense attorney. Your Honor, I think you and my client need a moment, privately. He looked up, surprised. That's highly irregular. So is life, she said quietly. Please, sir. She needs to talk to you. He hesitated and then nodded. Bring her in. Lily entered, her cuffs removed for the meeting. She looked smaller than before, fragile but determined. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, she whispered, It's really you, isn't it? Robert nodded slowly. Yes, her lip quivered. Why didn't you come for me? The question shattered him. I tried, Lily, he said, voice breaking. I wrote, I called. I sent everything I could. But your mother, she wanted to start over. I wasn't allowed near you. She shook her head, tears falling. Mom said you didn't care, that you forgot about us. He stepped closer, gently placing his hand over his heart. I never forgot. Not for 1 second, she looked away. Then why did my life end up like this? Why didn't you fight harder? Robert's voice cracked. Because I thought I was doing the right thing, staying away so you could have peace. I thought she'd give you a better life. A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't. That silence between them, full of all the years lost, was louder than any verdict he'd ever given. After a long moment, Robert whispered, You shouldn't be in here. Lily, not like this, she smiled sadly. Maybe it's fate. Maybe this was the only way we'd see each other again. He closed his eyes. Fate. Or punishment. I can't change the past, he said, but I can make sure your future is different. She frowned. How? He stepped back, gathering himself. By doing what's right, even if it costs me everything. When court resumed, the room was tense. The bailiff announced the judge's return. Robert sat down, face calm but heart-storming. Before we proceed, he said firmly, I need to make a statement. Everyone waited. This court recognizes that impartiality is essential to justice. However, he paused, meeting Lily's eyes. It has come to light that I have a personal connection to the defendant. The courtroom gasped. In light of this, he continued, I'm recusing myself from this case effective immediately. A new judge will be assigned. He set down his gavel. The sound echoed through the silent room. Lily's tears flowed freely now. Robert rose, his voice softer. But before I leave, Ms. Carter, know this. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about truth. Their eyes met one last time. Father and daughter reunited not by chance but by consequence. Outside the courtroom, reporters already buzzed, sensing a scandal. But Robert didn't care. For the first time in years, he felt human again. He walked toward Lily as the officers prepared to escort her. I'll be here, he whispered to her. Whatever happens next, I'm not leaving again. She smiled weakly through tears. Promise? He nodded. Promise. And as the door closed behind her, the man once known for his unbreakable gavel finally understood. Justice may be blind, but love always sees. The next morning, the courthouse buzzed like a stirred beehive. Headlines were already spreading. Judge recuses himself after discovering defendant is his daughter. Some called it scandal. Others called it integrity. For Judge Robert Hayes, it was neither. It was pain, pure and raw. He sat in his empty office, his robe folded neatly on the chair. He hadn't slept. His career might be over, but his conscience felt strangely light. Still, Lily's sentencing hearing was proceeding under a new judge that morning, and Robert couldn't rest knowing his daughter's fate would be decided by someone who didn't know her, someone who wouldn't see the broken little girl behind the case file. Meanwhile, in Courtroom 3B, Judge Eleanor Brooks presided over the case. She was known for her strict adherence to procedure, fair but cold. The prosecutor repeated his argument with the same clinical tone. Ms. Carter has a documented history of fraud and identity theft. Her actions have shown disregard for the law. The state requests 2 years incarceration. Sandra Pierce, still representing Lily, stood her ground. Your Honor, Ms. Carter has suffered abuse, neglect, and trauma. Punishing her won't reform her. It'll destroy what little hope she has left. Lily sat silently between them, her hands folded. Her eyes, though tired, seemed different today, as if a small ember of hope had been reignited. Outside the courtroom, Robert stood in the hallway dressed in a simple suit, watching through the small glass window in the door. He wasn't supposed to be there, but he couldn't stay away. He watched as Lily took the stand to testify. Ms. Carter, the new judge asked, why should this court believe that you'll change? Lily hesitated. Then softly she said, because for the first time, someone believes I can. Judge Brooks raised an eyebrow. And who is that? Lily took a shaky breath. My father. The room went still. Brooks leaned back. The former presiding judge? Lily nodded. Yes, Your Honor. And you think his belief should affect my decision? Lily's eyes glistened. No, ma'am. But his love already changed mine. The courtroom fell silent again. Even the stenographer hesitated for a second before typing. Robert felt tears blur his vision from the hallway. That one sentence, his love already changed mine, was worth every headline, every risk. But something about the prosecutor's tone next caught his attention. Your Honor, Daniel said, flipping through papers. The defense claims Miss Carter's crimes were acts of desperation. However, new evidence shows that the identity card she used belonged to a woman who recently passed away, a woman she knew. He held up a file. The deceased, Emily Ross, worked at a downtown diner, where Ms. Carter was employed briefly last year. We have reason to believe she stole the ID before quitting. Robert frowned. He had gone through Lily's file himself. There was no mention of this Emily Ross. Something didn't add up. Sandra stood. "Objection, Your Honor. This evidence was not included in discovery." Judge Brooks glanced at Daniels. "Mr. Prosecutor?" Daniels shrugged. "The file was submitted this morning by a third-party informant." "An anonymous source." Robert's instincts flared. "Anonymous evidence, late submission." It smelled like manipulation. He turned and walked briskly down the hallway, pulling out his phone. Within an hour, he was in the office of his trusted investigator. "Mark Delaney." "Mark," he said urgently, "I need you to check a name. Emily Ross, connected to a diner downtown, and a recent death." Delaney tapped quickly on his computer. "Got it. Died last year, met officially ruled an overdose." "But wait." He scrolled faster. "This gets weird. The report was filed by a man named Michael Carter." Robert's blood ran cold. "That's my ex-wife's husband. Lily's stepfather." Delaney frowned. "Yeah, and get this. He was released from prison 3 years ago after serving time for domestic assault. He's been off the radar since." Robert clenched his fists. "He's the anonymous informant. He's setting her up." Back in the courtroom, the prosecution was pushing hard. "Your Honor, this shows clear intent. The defendant knew the victim, had access to her belongings, and used her ID after her death." Sandra protested. "This is conjecture. The prosecution has no proof she took the ID." Judge Brooks sighed. "We'll recess for 1 hour. I'll review this new evidence." Lily was escorted out, looking broken again. Robert arrived moments later, breathless. He approached Sandra quietly outside the courtroom. "I have proof," he said, handing her a printed file. "The so-called informant is Michael Carter, the man who abused Lily and her mother. He's been trying to ruin her for years. Look, forged signatures, fake testimony. He's behind all of it." Sandra scanned the papers, eyes widening. "This could overturn everything." Robert nodded. "You have to present it before the recess ends." She hesitated. "Robert, if you're involved, they'll say you tampered." "I don't care. The truth matters more than my title." When court resumed, Sandra rose immediately. "Your Honor, new evidence has surfaced. Not from the prosecution, but from independent investigation." She handed the documents to Judge Brooks. "The so-called informant is Michael Carter, the defendant's abusive stepfather. His record shows a history of violence and manipulation. We have reason to believe he fabricated the connection between my client and the deceased Emily Ross." The courtroom buzzed. The prosecutor's face turned pale. Judge Brooks flipped through the documents, her sharp eyes scanning every page. Then she looked up. "Mr. Daniels, can you confirm this source?" Daniels stammered. I was told it came anonymously through the clerk's office." Brooks leaned forward. "Did you verify it?" He swallowed. "No, Your Honor." "Then this court finds the new evidence unreliable and strikes it from record." Lily exhaled, trembling, but Judge Brooks wasn't done. "Furthermore," she said, glancing at Lily, "based on the testimony, mitigating circumstances, and verified history of abuse, this court will not impose a custodial sentence." Lily's eyes widened. Brooks continued, "Ms. Carter will be released under court supervision to a rehabilitation program. Her progress will be reviewed every 6 months. This court believes justice is not always served by punishment, but by giving life another chance." The gavel struck once, clean, final, liberating. The room erupted. Reporters scribbled, people whispered, and Sandra hugged Lily with tears in her eyes. But Lily's gaze searched the back of the courtroom and found her father standing quietly by the door. Their eyes met again, but this time it wasn't shock or pain between them. It was peace, she mouthed silently. "Thank you." He nodded once, tears welling, outside. As the courthouse steps emptied, Lily walked out into the sunlight, free. Robert waited at the bottom, unsure if he should approach. She hesitated too, then slowly made her way toward him. They stood face to face for the first time without walls. "Robes or fear between them? Do I call you Your Honor now?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly. "No, just Dad will do." She laughed through tears and stepped forward, hugging him tightly. He froze for half a second, then wrapped his arms around her like he'd never let go. For 15 years, he had sentenced others to justice. Today, life had sentenced him to forgiveness. Later that evening, Robert sat on his porch with Lily beside him. The sun dipped low behind the city skyline. "So, what happens now?" she asked. He looked at her gently. "Now? We start over, together." She smiled faintly. "That sounds fair," he chuckled. "Finally, someone thinks so." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I missed you. I missed you more than you'll ever know." A single tear rolled down his cheek, not of sorrow this time, but of grace. And as the final light of day faded, the gavel of fate rested at last, because in that quiet moment between father and daughter, justice wasn't blind, it was beautiful.